Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I am your host, Noor Kyle, joined by
Her faithful sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
Yay. Thank you for joining us once again, whether you're here live or watching on the YouTube replay. We're very happy to have you here and to just enjoy each other's company. And we will be getting to another Sufi story this evening. So that means you get two in a row. You have been spoiled now. But in the meanwhile, we do have some housekeeping things to mention, such as our encouraging you to support us via subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving comments, perhaps liking this video when you enjoy it. And
Don't enjoy it. I mean, if you hate the video, like it anyway.
I mean, if that's your jam,
Yeah.
entertain yourself, sure, do that. Um, you can also hang out with us on Facebook. We do have an Instagram as well, which I'm going to start poking us to use more, I guess. And most importantly, if you don't want to engage on social media, that's cool. You can join our mailing list either way. And in fact, I encourage you to do so because in this crazy world, we never know what's going to happen in the world of social media, but email seems to be pretty good at holding its own. And we also allow you the opportunity to join us on these Zoom calls either through our mailing list when you join our special sub list via our email or via our Facebook group, which we call the Nine-Sided Circle Facebook forum. So you can join either of those places if you want to hang out with us live. You're always welcome to pop in via those avenues. And lastly, of course, as we've been mentioning these last few weeks, we are doing our fund drive right now, which means if you send us a donation, either via our PayPal or via Stripe or via our coffee, if you don't want to do one-offs, you can do a recurring donation via coffee. And some people just like doing that anyway because it lets them have like a way to interact with us through their donation. But in any case, when you donate, you enter our raffle in which we will be offering up three free one-on-one sessions. Or, maybe we could throw in a two-on-one session in there and you'll get to hang out with us instead of us asking for our usual fee, which is either 550 for newcomers who join us and want to get to know us via a curiosity session, or 100 for those people who would like to work with us on a regular basis and find value in receiving one-on-one counsel and teaching. I see someone nodding their head. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you get something out of the work that we offer. Um, so yeah, that is quite a deal. And may, join the raffle and may you win. Have I left anything out? Mush Talk.
Uh, Nothing important.
Great. So let's get to our talk this evening, during which we will be, like I said, sharing a Sufi story. And the topic this evening is, let me just pull it up, make sure I get it right. The topic this evening is Mullah Nasruddin receives a lesson. So, where would you like to begin, Mushtaq?
Well, Mullah Nasruddin was not always the great scholar and mystic that we know today. There was a time where he didn't even have a donkey. He was just a young student. And he had a master, a shaykh by the name of Ali Baba, Sheikh Ali Baba. And every day, Nasruddin, who was not yet a mullah, would go to Ali Baba's house and he would listen to him talk about different things. They would discuss points, and sometimes Ali Baba would tell him important things, sometimes in the form of stories. And one day, Nasruddin showed up at the house of his sheikh, and his sheikh said, "Sit, and I am going to tell you a story about an ancient city." And you may notice, folks, that there's a little bit of similarity between this story and last week's story, and that's because there's a lot of stories like this. But this is a slightly different story. But it does involve a magician. Many, many years ago, a magician came to a small city and he decided that he was going to become the king of this city. And he had a very interesting way of doing it. He would go out and he would find about five, six people, and he would enchant them, then bring them with him to a special house that he had prepared. The house was just one big room, and in it, there were things for them to do. They could work on certain projects for the magician. Um, there was food, but it was not very good food. And there was a ladder that went up one wall, bolted into the wall. And at the top of the ladder was a shelf. And on the shelf was a book. And the book said, "How to Achieve Your Freedom." And the magician would wait. And one of the people would inevitably go up and start to climb the ladder. He would put his hand on the ladder, put his foot on the ladder. And the moment he did that, the magician would cast a spell upon everyone in the room that caused them great pain and suffering. They would be rolling on the floor with agony. And he did this any time that anyone touched the ladder, even though there was the book up there that said, "How to Achieve Your Freedom." And this went on for a little while. And what happened was somebody would approach the ladder, and before they got there, everybody else in the room would jump him, beat him up, keep him from going up the ladder. And then the magician would take someone out of the room and put a new person in. And the new person would go up to the ladder and everybody would jump him. And the guy wouldn't even know what was going on. He just knew that if he touched the ladder, he'd get beaten up. And after a week or so of this, the magician would replace another one of the people. And this would go on until all of the people were replaced. And yet everyone in the room would still jump on anybody who tried to climb the ladder for the book, even though they didn't even know why, because the magician was no longer causing them pain. And he would do this with group after group after group, teaching them various things to do. And until the entire city had been through this room. And think about it for a minute. They would all attack anybody who thought about freedom. Didn't even need the ladder anymore. And Mullah said, "That is horrible. What was the upshot of this?" And his teacher said, "The city remained slaves. They would work for the magician, they would do certain things, but none of them ever approached the idea of finding their freedom because they knew if they did, they'd get beat up. They didn't even know why they would get beat up for doing that." And Mullah said, "That's horrible. I would hate to live in a city like that." And his teacher laughed and said, "Nasruddin, this is the city that happened. You are living in this city. So ask yourself, why do you fear your own freedom? And watch other people and ask them why they fear their own freedom. And mostly, they won't even be able to tell you. They won't even know that what they fear is their own freedom. They just know that if people do certain things, they have to beat them up for their own safety." Mullah thought long and hard about this. And after he thought and he thought and he thought, he went out and he bought a donkey, which is a rational response to this because donkeys don't care about that sort of thing. At least you have somebody to talk to. So there's a little story for you there. Question is, what does it mean? Does it mean anything for us?
Well, structurally, it reminded me a lot of the idea of Kunda buffer in Beelzebub's Tales,
Yeah.
where the initial Kunda buffer was put there, and then it was removed, but the effects just carried on for generations to the
Yeah.
present.
And that is a very astute observation. Bless you.
Thanks, Ian. Who else?
Yeah,
Alka.
sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. No worries at all.
Alka,
Mustad, yeah, I when you were telling this story in the beginning, I really started like listening to you, and I realized during that story, I was one of those people, and you were the magician who's pulling us. And then I suddenly realized I need to observe myself. I need to be out of this picture. It was almost like a real time experience for me.
yeah,
And I woke up. Yeah. And that was like first time it has happened to me, like how we all get influenced and how everybody is a magician in some ways, right? Uh, so for me, it was a real time experience of waking up.
yeah. I am happy to say that I am not the magician. I am Nasruddin's donkey.
But what I mean is,
Yeah, I understand.
right, right. So this was that's how these magicians play with us. That's how we're all sleeping, right? So that's how I felt. Like it was for me, it was a personal experience. Thank you.
Osama, you look like you're thinking really hard.
Why do I fear my own freedom?
It's a good question. Why do you fear your own freedom? Why is there
Yeah,
pain associated with freedom?
I'm
You
not,
will not be
yeah,
liked.
yeah, that came up. Um,
Yep.
to be fully
Nobody
seen,
will love me.
to be um shut out from community, to uh the hardship that comes. Can I find can I make a living? Can I all of these things that's the mind is that's what that's saying. Um, why do I fear my own freedom?
That is a very good question.
Yeah.
Yep. And you've touched on things that are going to be commonly shared for many, many people. James.
Couple of things. Firstly, fear of freedom is fear of the unknown of an uncontrollable future in which the pain of the past might recur. I mean, you want the known so you can keep the pain of the past at bay, previous pains at bay. You want to control the situation so bad stuff doesn't happen again. So on the personal level, there's that. A fear of a painful future, that the unknown doesn't carry guarantees of certain experiences not recurring. The other thing, did that make sense, by the way, what I just said?
Yeah.
Yeah, people often say, "Oh, we're scared of the unknown." No, we're actually scared of a painful future based on a painful past. We're scared of an uncontrollable future, and the unknown is uncontrollable. So that's the personal fear of freedom, the stepping outside your guaranteed control, or what you think are your guaranteed controls. Then there's the social aspect, which is we want to keep the protections of society running, but we want to be confident that our neighbor has the same belief in the validity of those protections as we do, or that we want to feel. So it's the fear there is as much fear of your neighbor being free, of your neighbor not having the same underlying beliefs that prop up the social structure, regardless whether your neighbor does or doesn't. Just the paranoid fear that your neighbor doesn't have the set of social assumptions and beliefs that you think are necessary for the protections of society. So it's another unknown factor. That's what came to my mind, anyhow. So all revolves around pain.
And control in the sense of doing those patterns that make us feel as if we may be more in control than we
Yes, as
actually
if
are.
yes.
Yeah. I
But
see
is
people
but is that
nodding, so
is that really getting back to the parable, to the story? Because that's just me bouncing off it.
well, I think it's definitely relevant in the sense that we are unpacking those things that cause us to not only micromanage ourselves and our own behavior, but that of other people, and what makes us jump on them and feel like we need to uh settle them down, rein them in for their own good, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each of us has experienced this. Everyone listening to this has been beat up for inexplicable reasons over something that makes no sense. And most of the time, they'll never understand why. And the people who do the beating don't understand why.
So we have thank you, James. I think that is helping us continue this conversation and go a little bit deeper. Ian, do you have any more thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually something that's very similar to what James was just talking about, but it comes from a slightly different angle, because the phrase that ran through my mind was Karl Marx's famous "religion is the opium of the people," and it made me think that there's a lot of power in groups, and whether it's religious groups or political groups or cultural identity groups. Basically, the group identity of whatever sort it is something that people don't want. They do want. they want to keep all of the people in the group. They don't want people to leave it. There's penalties for deciding to leave the group. And in some cases, I mean, for example, I think in some branches of Islam, um, if you're a Muslim and you decide to leave, I believe the harshest interpretations of Sharia law call for death.
Um, the harshest interpretation of, uh, I hate the term Sharia law. There is no such thing as Sharia law. Sharia is just opinion. Um,
Well,
Osama can give us a legal opinion that is just as binding as anybody else's. So can I. So can Noor. It's just a matter of who do you get to agree with you. Sorry, this is a pet peeve of mine and has
Yeah,
nothing to do with what you're saying, basically. But yeah, the harshest interpretation of Islam is that if you become a Muslim and then you decide, nah, I don't like this, I'd rather be a Christian, some Muslims think they should kill you.
apostasy. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, and in fact, if you go back to the Middle Ages and uh, the way that Catholics treated the heretics, the
Yeah.
Protestants,
The
I
quote
mean,
unquote heretics.
it
Yeah.
was it was that on a grand scale.
Yeah, or the way Charlemagne treated the German pagans. I mean, you got a lot of that going on. Everybody is afraid of heresy. Heresy is not believing what everybody else believes.
So I want to bring RM's
Yeah.
chat comments into the conversation relevant here. So looking at it from the Western psychology lens, RM says there is insecure attachment to familiarity. And this to me, if I'm understanding correctly, it's kind of like you are clinging to familiarity because not only do you feel like you cannot count on it to continue to be there to give you comfort because it could just escape you. I mean, this is the idea of insecure attachment. It's like a clinging because there is that lack of trust there that you can depend on it protecting you to be there for you. And familiarity is kind of a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. But in this context, we may cling to it as a way to kind of fortify ourselves, to tell ourselves a story of security. So, RM continues to say lack of self-trust can be a reason for fear. Absolutely. I mean, I can say from experience, that's a big cause of fear for me is feeling like, do I have the inner fortitude or resources or capacity to be able uh to be there for myself in the way that would allow me to live the life that I might fantasize about living in freedom. So, thank you, RM. Kyle, you have your hand up.
Uh, yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add that hasn't already been said, but uh, what came up for me, it seemed like this was as the metaphor is that the city represents the individual, and within us we have all these things passing through that keep us from, um, I guess, even reaching the base of the ladder sometimes, and we just kind of end up getting stuck often, whether it's in usually for me, it's my own like compulsive habits and the things that I just end up doing all day, every day. And even though I do have the luxury of time and comfort and security, I live in the 21st century. Um, I have a lot of powerful tools and technology at my fingertips. I just, the time fritters away.
That's a very interesting observation.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing in this idea of this being both an internal and external phenomenon. There's so much truth in that. Nancy, yeah, I noticed you were unmuted earlier and I
Okay.
had a feeling, so thank you for raising your hand and making sure we
Yeah,
had your
I
your
know I'm not
thoughts.
always reliable with the mute button, but anyway, I was thinking about me and Qigong, which it's like it does make my life better. It gives me a little more freedom. And I frequently find myself reluctant to do it or to give it my full attention when I do it. And it's rather mysterious what's going on with that. It's like nobody else cares whether I'm doing Qigong. It's not like anybody knows to beat me up for it. And yet, still, there it is.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's the
what is
ultimate
cause?
thing, when you have been trained to beat yourself up for doing the things that are not permissible to do. Other
Yeah,
people don't even have to do it anymore.
hmm yeah, I have a sort of general theory of bullying because I was looking at the question of why do people put so much energy into it? What's in it for them? And it occurred to me that the hook for bullies is they don't want to see their victim feel happy. Um, you know, it reaches a point where the bully can get by on imagining somebody feeling bad. But the thing is, if you've been bullied, you're afraid to be too happy because it brings on attacks. Um, and I think that's something that goes on a lot. And so, it can come out as like being afraid to take a real breath. Um, I guess that's it, except that the way I've always heard this story, it was about chimpanzees and a ladder and a human experimenter with a hose.
Yeah, there's various versions of the story.
Yeah, the way you're telling it, where it's people, it's rather more pointed.
Yeah.
So I guess that's it.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah,
You're
I
welcome.
mean, um, Kyle mentions really feeling what you're saying about being afraid to take a real breath. He says, being afraid to take a real breath, that's amazing, profound. So what you're saying resonates for people, Nancy. Um, Something coming up in the chat. I'm just reading through it first. Okay. Shall I go ahead and bring that into the conversation, Mush Talk? Yeah, okay. RM says, if we could see beyond the scene, we would learn about the resources and how to use them, like the ladder and book in this story, to find our freedom. Even though the ladder and book will be the first steps to freedom, the real goal will be to live life with freedom. The real goal will be to live life with freedom. Easier said than done.
Yeah. And to do that, we must all ask ourselves one question, which is, what are you not allowed to think? It's a tricky question because if you're not allowed to think it, you're not going to think it if you ask yourself the question. You have to trick yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Or, even just to dismiss it out of hand, it comes to mind and you're like, no, no, that's useless. Throw that out. Not thinking about that. Something else, anything else, because that one thing is just so scary.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how many years ago it was, but it was a long time ago. I spent a fair bit of time thinking about taboos and at least doing thought experiments about breaking them. It's a tricky subject because there are a lot of taboos where you really don't want to
Yeah,
do it,
there
like
are
killing
taboos that
someone.
are
But
there for a reason, but
yeah, yeah,
there are a lot more that aren't there for a reason.
yeah.
Um, so Austin has a thought, and then Mush Talk. I want to bring it back to you because you were mentioning that we don't even let ourselves go there to begin with
Yep.
sometimes. So Austin, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to echo a little bit what Kyle said about seeing the story in the lens of through the lens of the individual. And I see it so simple in the way that, let's say you're trying to just be awake throughout your day, or let's say you're just trying to be present throughout your day. The mind is constantly fabricating stories, it's constantly like filtering what you're seeing and distorting it and creating its own storyline. And it's doing this over and over and over again. Like, oh, this person looked at me a certain way. This person's tone of voice probably came off a certain way. Do I look okay? Am I saying the right thing? Is my posture okay? And it's like a constant thing where it's taking us away, at least in my experience, like taking me away from this moment right here now, just being awake. And so these people who are grabbing at the individual, trying to get up the ladder is a lot, at least the way that I see it, it's a lot of thought, just like thought patterns and emotional patterns and unconscious patterns that are taking us away from just simply being here, right? Just being aware of ourselves. And another thing that came to mind, there's a video by Anthony DeMello where he's giving a demonstration in front of people, and towards the end of one of these sections, he questions the crowd and says, "Do you know anyone who's free? Do you know anyone who is actually free of their own conditioning and programming?" And personally, I don't know anyone in my life. Um, and that stayed with me. That's been staying with me for the last few weeks, really. Like this idea of freedom, internal freedom, freedom from approval, freedom from the need to blame someone, freedom from our past and how that continually influences our decisions. Just a complete free human being, and that's such an intriguing thought, really, to follow and to see how that plays out.
Thank you, Austin. Maybe we can hunt down that conversation that Anthony DeMello was having and post it in the forum or something.
Most certainly.
All right, so Mushtaq, you were pulling us back to the story in the context of this sense of just kind of being completely alienated from those from freedom, basically, via being prevented from even considering
Yeah.
what could get us there.
Yeah. Like I said, there are some things that we are not allowed to think. So I'm a Muslim, you're a Muslim. We know about some of these things. There is a hadith of the Prophet, and it's a pretty strong hadith, that somebody came to him and asked him, which shoe should I put on first? And he said, put your right shoe on first. And since then, everybody's putting their right shoe on first. And there's a couple of ways to look at this. One of them is This was serious consideration and the voice of the prophet telling you what God wants you to do. There's another point of view, which is the prophet is sitting there and this idiot comes up and asks him this stupid question and he thinks about it and he doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And he goes, I don't know, put your right shoe on first. But we're not allowed to think of that second one. Well, there you go, Nancy. You're,
There's that, but what about for those of us who aren't Muslims?
then you would have to tell me. What is Nancy not allowed to think? And I know you know the answer to that question because we've discussed it a bit, but I ain't going to remind you. You're going to have to remind yourself.
Okay, I did tell somebody to go to hell recently and the world didn't blow up, so there's something.
Yeah, good for you. So this is a question that each of us needs to answer ourselves, ask ourselves. What are we not allowed to think? What questions are we not allowed to ask? If you're a Christian, you can go to your church and go up to your preacher and say, Yo, preacher, Jesus had to die for our sins, right? And the preacher goes, Yes, Jesus died for our sins. He suffered so that we could be redeemed. And then you go, But when he was alive, he forgave sins. What's up with that? And for example, in the Gospel of Luke, there's the guy who's lowered down from the roof, and Jesus heals him and says, Your sins are forgiven. Right there, he forgives the guy's sins. So if he can do that while he's still alive, why did he need to die? And then you watch their head explode, and the next thing you know, they're building a bonfire out in the parking lot, and you're in big trouble because you're not allowed to ask that.
Ian says, that's a good one.
Yeah, I'm full of those.
Um, yeah, so James, we'll bring that in shortly. He's commented in the chat.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I think it seems less subtle these days because we live in a particularly quote unquote individualist culture. And yet I think there are ways in which we still just as eagerly, crush each other's spirits. And it may seem subtle, but I mean, think about the way that we talk to each other on social media, for example, and just how readily people are willing to dox each other over things that are hurtful, but that can be understood as mistakes of ignorance, for just an example, right? And some people are not willing to I want to be careful in how I say this, but I do think that there is a problem with people being too trigger happy about uh isolating people for things that they see on the internet. And that does not stay on the internet. It can affect their friendships, their marriages, their job prospects, their entire future career. And without the resources to do PR damage control, I mean, that's typically for people with money who are arguably probably assholes in real life anyway. But for the average person, that can be pretty devastating. So this is not, we are not completely out of the realm where People are willing to attack each other to keep each other in line. Okay, you have a thought.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Um, I was thinking on my personal journey for decades, I would say at least 3 to 4 decades, I have never been told not to do something or you cannot do something. Um, what I was telling myself, I was under that magician spell that I need to work, I need to be somebody special, right? Have big titles. And then one day, for whatever reason, I left everything. And the same people who used to never say anything to me started telling me I've gone crazy, I've gone nuts. Maybe because I'm not married, because I don't have kids, I've lost my mind, right? Like because I wasn't fitting the norm. I ended up asking one person who's really like, whose opinion mattered to me. I asked her, what are you afraid of? What will I do? For years, if I have not done anything wrong, as per you, what do you think I will do? What am I doing wrong that is scaring you? And she said, it's not you. It's like I cannot control you anymore. Like
It's
we've
an
lost
honest
control
answer.
on you.
Sorry, what was
Say it
that,
again.
Mush Talk?
I said that's an honest answer. That's a more honest
Yeah,
answer than you usually get.
yeah. And I said, that's it. That's your problem, not mine.
Yeah, and taking a stand in that way can be a simple case of, well, I've stated my case with you, you can take it or leave it, and then you remain friends. And in other cases, it can mean ostracization from the community and who knows what else. And we are all going to have to grapple with those realities. So I guess I can pull in James's remark here. He says, if we are going to be free of the past, free of conditioning, and no longer dependent on its quote unquote thoughts, we need to be awake to the energies of the now.
Sorry about the language, but it does sort of seem to me that we depend on conditioning as some kind of guidance system. That's one of the reasons why we cling to it. Uh, if we really want to be free from that, we have to be very alert to what's going on now in its broader totality as we can. Otherwise, we're just, I don't know, we're not really free, we're just blank. Or is
Say
that a major
more.
mistake?
What's that?
Or is that a major mistake on my part?
Mm, interesting. So when you say being awake to the energies of the now, let's
Okay,
unpack
just,
that a little. What do you mean
well,
by that?
I'm not the authority, but in the brief glimpses I've had, when the compulsions is when they are temporarily in abeyance, uh, I feel the immediate moment a lot more deep and more viscerally. I don't just see it more clearly. I have a feeling for it. So this is very vague language, and I'm sorry. Um, but the idea is I'm being guided by or I'm plugged into something that is now that is beyond my attempts to wrap it up in thought, but in many ways is more reliable if I can move with it. So all I can think of is the cliche terms like the now, the flow, whatever, as opposed to seeing everything through the lens of past conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as human beings, we need to act, we need to move, we're always moving. And if you want to make a really crude binary, we're either going on past conditioning, which may be completely irrelevant, self-defeating, whatever, or we're going through a real guided by real sensitivity to the moment, and that's freedom, or an aspect of it. Perhaps it's practical aspect.
Yeah, as opposed to being, stuck under the tyranny of the past or the future, but responding to what is actively present. And when we have fears coming into the game, those typically are wrapped up in the past or the future, as you say. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to imagine what freedom is like. Like freedom is often spoken in almost nebulous terms, or simply negative, like what it's not, but what would it be like to be free?
Mm, yeah.
Um, Otherwise, it can just degenerate into freedom becomes just robotic self-indulgence, which is just
Right.
another recapitulation of the past in a more infantile way. Um, yeah, there's something very expansive and bright and energetic about freedom.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you have to ask with freedom, it's either freedom from or freedom to.
Yes, freedom too.
Yes.
Mm,
And you have to realize that all freedom is limited
mm.
unless you're a psychopath.
Uh,
So the question is, who creates the limits?
mm.
And the answer needs to be you do. I mean, I'm a wonderful person, but if I created your limits for you, that would be messed up.
Well, the psychopath, to my mind, has collapsed into a far more narrow range of perception and experience and possibility, even if they're gleefully delighted in it. In another sense, I think they're more restricted than the average person in a
Mm,
certain sense.
I
Not
would have to
socially, perhaps,
disagree
but
with that.
sorry,
I would have to disagree with that. I thought you were a
because
fan of Colin Wilson.
yeah.
Yeah, so read what he has to say about psychopaths.
Um, Well, I can just remember his commentary on the Marquis de Sade, and he he had wonderful language about serial killers actually being in a far narrower state of perception than the average person, and even though they felt they were gloriously free, but they're actually living in a far more smaller, shuttered room, and it was going to catch up with them eventually.
Yeah,
So,
but that's serial killers. Not all psychopaths are serial
fair
killers.
enough. Yep.
Most
Point taken.
psychopaths are not serial killers.
Hmm. Um, okay, well, tell me, where am I going wrong on this one?
That's almost like me giving you your limits.
Ah, okay.
If you are going wrong, it is best for you to figure out where you're going wrong, how you're going wrong.
Well, now I'm
Ask the
just quibbling
questions.
over the term psychopath. I don't know if it's really
Yeah, a psychopath is, um, we don't need to get into that tonight because that'll
yeah,
take up way
fair
too
enough.
much time.
Yep.
But yeah, that's something you can check out. That's something you can look up.
I
I've
I
got
just
my
want
own
to.
preconceptions.
Okay. Whew. So I have some thoughts, but I can hold on to them because I see Ian and then Austin have stuff they'd like to say.
Yeah, I just have to throw this in as a tangent. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. But that wasn't what prompted me to raise my hand. Um, Comes back to what Austin was saying originally about do you know anyone who's free? And then, of course, James has brought this whole question back again. And Mushtaq alluded to it with levels of freedom, because it occurred to me that in Gurdjieff's model of the various levels of laws, you can't ever say that anyone is absolutely free. It's just a question of how many laws are we actually living under at any particular time. That was just that's the
Which
observation.
is an interesting observation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. And song quotes. Run away. All right. Austin.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of Nancy's comment. Does anyone have examples of things people aren't allowed to think? And in that same excerpt by DeMello, he's addressing the crowd, and he said something that really shocked me. He said, "If if you're angry," and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, "If you're angry, if you're upset, if you're agitated, if you're irritated, don't even question it. You're fast asleep." And he goes on to say, I mean, if you're not enjoying every second of your life, there's a good probability that you're fast asleep. And I sat with that for some time. And the more that I realize it, when I do find myself agitated or irritated or frustrated or worried, I usually catch myself in that moment. I'm like, oh, okay, the mind is playing these games again. And the way that I see freedom is definitely in the present moment. And it's almost associated with like this underlying joy. Or I don't know, my mind's quiet. And the more that the mind is quiet, the more that like it almost feels like my heart opens and there's just this joy that just comes from seeing the birds and just feeling my feet on the ground and feeling the air and feeling the wind and just being here in this moment, even being in the office where I can see this like small little pumpkin decoration that we have there. And it's just realizing, oh my God, I'm fabricating more stories and I'm not enjoying whatever's in front of me. And so it's something that I repeat in my head pretty often. Like, am I enjoying my life right now? Am I am I caught in my mechanical nature? And and it's not necessarily that, we can't be depressed or we can't be angry, or we can't be worried, right? Morris Nichols says something along the lines. It's like it's not necessarily that we don't want to express negative emotions, that we have a right not to. And so we can be human, but we can be conscious of it. And I think that's where that freedom lies. At least I'm doing my best to verify it.
Definitely interesting stuff. Thank you, Austin. Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna be chewing on that myself.
Yeah.
That DeMello thought, and I think that's important. So, RM says, question regarding Austin's explanation. How do I know that I am not spiritually bypassing? Hmm. I think it is very easy to confuse the two.
I think self-observation would help here a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if if I'm ignoring something that's really hurting me or hurting someone in front of me, and I'm saying, "Oh, this is not my problem." Or if I love this example of like being on a high vibration, or like I'm just on a high vibration. You're just not vibrating at the same level. I honestly love when I hear people talk about that because it's one of those where I'm not quite sure if they're seeing, or maybe they know something I don't, right? But it's one of those where I think self-observation, just being very honest with yourself, or having someone around you that's very honest with you and can say, "Hey, I think you're doing, I think you should look at this," right? But there's also, at least the way that I see it, it's like we're so identified with our personality that if you try to offend me and I try to justify and defend myself in ways that, are just very reactive, I can just say, well, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously caught in something here. But yeah, for me, it's just trying to be as honest as I can with myself.
Mm, okay. RM continues by asking, what do you do with those patterns after self-observation? When trying to change isn't another type of trap ego is creating. Well, I mean, first of all, what comes to mind is I know certain people in my life who have gotten into the trap of fate. We've talked about fate and destiny. I think this is another worthy thread to bring into at least that part of the conversation, which is that I think people sometimes they chalk things up to fate without realizing that it is within their power to make a change. And so they were spiritually bypassed by saying, well, this is just my lot. This was meant for me. And the fact is that perhaps, I mean, I'm not sure I completely buy this, but perhaps the challenge was meant for you, not necessarily a preconceived result, which may well be within your power to change. And so spiritual bypassing might allow you to sit back and just uh to forego your freedom and accept as is, harm and all. But yeah, I think we don't want to get too far afield. I think it would be very worthwhile to check out our conversation on fate and destiny and also hazard if people have like a tangential interest in that kind of thing. Nancy.
Just a couple of difficult thoughts. One that really made me jump was the idea that if you hate cruelty, you end up hating the human race, which isn't how hating cruelty is supposed to work, I think. And the other one is something that stays on my mind, which is what if believing in individual responsibility is mostly an excuse to punish people? That I came up with that one when I watched a big ideological shift happen, and it was seeing people influence each other so much. It's like, is this really about individuals?
Yeah.
Oh, and one, excuse me?
No, go ahead.
Oh, just one more. I was thinking about, okay, what's a difficult thought for a non-Muslim? And one possibility is that being Jewish is no big deal. I
You
mean,
mean
that's
like,
something Jews tend, excuse me?
I'm sorry, finish your thought. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, just that I think that's something that Jews tend to agree about is that being Jewish is a big deal.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
well,
Chosen
maybe
people,
it
all
isn't.
that.
Excuse me?
Chosen people and all that. Yeah. So,
Even if you're not religious enough to believe in being chosen, it can still be a big deal.
I
yeah.
can see how
So,
that would be a spicy topic. Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
starting with if you uh, hate cruelty, you will end up hating the human race. That is
Yeah.
pathological thinking.
Yeah, something about that doesn't
Yeah,
It doesn't work.
that means you have to generalize your hate for somebody who is cruel to every member of the set, of which there are, what, 4 billion or whatever, most of whom you don't know, you have no sense of their behavior, their persons, or anything like that. That's pathological thinking. And that's the kind of thing that you get conditioned to think. It's a cute little catchphrase, and it's that falls into the category of thought terminating cliches. And it's
Okay, it jolted.
demonstrably not true.
Okay, it jolted me because okay, it's not everybody, but there's an awful lot of cruelty.
Um, maybe. So if it floats your boat, hate cruel people,
Hmm.
but be willing to name them.
Okay.
If you can't name the person, then you're just generalizing.
Mhm.
And thought terminating cliches are one of the ways to find out what you're not allowed to think.
Ian, thanks, Nancy.
Well,
You're muted, I guess.
Sorry about that. There was a couple of examples that had flashed through my mind. One was that when Trump refused to do the peaceful transfer of power, he basically changed the Overton window that had been there for 200 odd years. Um, so that's one example of where in very recent history, the whole thing of what are you allowed to think got changed for a very significant portion of the population of the US. Then the other one is just a little funny one. It's the classic Zen. I forget which Zen master said this, but if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. I mean, you can't get more taboo than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a commonly quoted phrase now, but it's still, it is, yes, absolutely. It has that quality of, how could you say that? How could you say that? So, I'm also reflecting on what you were saying about, Trump having stirred the pot around breaking with the norms of the peaceful transport for power. And this gets into the realm of what we talk about around, yes, we do seek freedom. And in the process, we are also trying to grow up into adults with the three things entailed in that, which are developing a conscience, being able to see others as subjects, as we are subjects. And what is the third thing, Mush Talk?
Future pacing.
Future pacing, Chris. Thank you. Future pacing, being able to see the consequences of our actions. Ah, someone like Trump is doing things that are outside the realm of quote unquote what is normal, but he's certainly not an adult. And he lacks the freedom, frankly, to behave as one. So there's that too.
Yeah. But enough about him.
Yeah.
Because a whole bunch of people are going to start commenting, how dare you say this
Oh,
about
Trump
Trump?
derangement syndrome. Yeah, I honestly,
Yeah.
I would not talk about him, but he comes up.
Yeah. So it saves me the trouble of having to delete all their comments.
Mm.
I'm lazy, so I hate doing that.
So, yeah, we are not saying freedom without constraint. We've said that pretty much from the beginning of
Freedom
this talk.
without constraint is a form of sociopathy.
Mhm.
And you can argue about people being limited or not, but when there is nothing that keeps you from doing whatever you want to another person, that's a lot of freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider the US Constitution's First and Second Amendments, uh, because there's a large number of people who want to have particularly should we say particularly expansive views of both of them, and yet it's clear that there need to be limits. And the classic example for the First Amendment is yelling fire in a crowded theater. Um,
There's even more limits than that. Saying
yeah,
anything in a theater is not protected by the First Amendment. The First Amendment is a limit on the government, what they can and cannot do to you when you speak. So I can criticize a politician, and the politician is not allowed to write a law to penalize me for criticizing them. But if you walk into my house and say something that I don't like, I have a perfect right to throw your ass out on the street because the First Amendment addresses what the government can do. So it's a limit.
and even with the Second Amendment and the expansive state that the NRA has put us in with that, um, I don't think anyone's allowed to own RPGs in the US.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
not
actually you
voluntary.
are, but you need to have a special license from the government to do it. You can own a machine gun, you can own an RPG, you can own lots of really scary shit if you have the proper papers and license. Most people can't get those proper papers and license because they have no reason to have that stuff. But yeah, but that's another one where people go insane. There is no sanity to be found in discussing the Second Amendment. It just creates massive emotional upheaval in people.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting to view it from the perspective of having grown up in the UK where there's very few guns around.
Yeah.
I'm not intrinsically anti-gun because I had an uncle and aunt who owned a farm
Mhm.
and they had a shot. My uncle had a shotgun and routinely shot small pests, pigeons and rabbits and the like. And I
Yeah.
still remember a gorgeous pigeon pie that my aunt made when I was on holiday there once.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but but uh, but it shocked me when after I'd moved to the States, initially to California, and one day I discovered that almost everyone who worked in the plant owned a gun.
yeah.
Uh, It was a like wow.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, and here's something people don't realize about the Second Amendment. Part of the reason that it was written in is because of the Brits in England, where the regular person was not allowed to be armed, and not just with firearms, but swords. The population was kept disarmed, and they tried to do that to us here. And we decided that we didn't want England sneaking over and invading us and having everybody not have guns to fight back. Chris, England is not going to invade us these days.
I was going to say that's a nice way of turning it back and saying it's our fault.
Yeah, everything about the original American thing is the fault of the British.
Yeah, and I
You
won't do
guys
that.
hadn't tried to tax our tea, we might still be colonies.
Yeah, and I can't say that I'm proud of our colonial history.
Yeah, well,
Um,
Yeah,
we're
none
not,
of us are. None of us are.
we've got our own baggage, that's for sure.
Osama, what do you got?
Taking the conversation into a different turn,
Please.
possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Going back to maybe 3 Sundays ago when we did the exercise of remembrance
Hmm.
and remembering back. Um, Talking about freedom is also another, as I'm listening to everybody share, discipline also came to mind with freedom or these constraints, um, and how even within the constraints of discipline, a sense of freedom is also born from within that. Uh, I was doing some reading as far as uh, after that experience, after the meditation that you led us through, and uh, this reading is from the Physicians of the Heart in regards to the divine attribute Yabadia, which is the originator. And what struck me is that the last bit of it, where it talks about how this characterization or the manifestation of that, this uh, level of creativity that comes through establishing a tradition or establishing a discipline in order to allow for that freedom, which is it manifested as creativity. And here it says repetition of or embodiment of that name, the creator or the originator, offers a remedy for the ego's need to impose its sense of truth on others and make it an obligatory duty for them. Like, even how we're talking about all these, political stuff and my sense of freedom, your sense of freedom, or even the idea people need to be free. Like what? Um, what is it that this this things that says, okay, this I now to have a taste of a subjective truth. Maybe it's objective truth, and the people around me should also have that truth as well. And not only that, but it's obligatory in order for us to engage. That should be the ground of the engagement. So that establishing discipline, constraint for freedom, and at the same time, how can it be that it is me? Kind of like the um, the quote that you guys quote in the email from a nation would not change or people would not change until the change is from within.
Yes.
And it can be only from an individual, and that's it. It's from my sense. But if I change and then I look at my neighbor and say, now it's your turn. Now it's you have to do it. You have to do it. And then they're
Yeah.
like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
And then your neighbor will get his friends together and burn you at the stake.
Exactly. Yeah. So, what is that balance as far as doing it internally, individually, and then at the same time allow, like, how does one also allow for that to, is there some kind of rubbing off into the
Yeah.
environment that a person is in?
Do the work, transform yourself, and be the kind of person that people come around like as if you were a campfire on a cold night.
Yeah, I
You
vaguely
don't,
remember. Go
yeah,
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, you don't tell people to change. You inspire them through your own actions. So they come and ask you, how did you get to be like this? Because you can't change them. You can change you. You can be that which attracts them or not.
I think what I was going to say was this is like our conversation last week where we were like getting into what does it mean to be a teacher? Does that mean I go and preach at everybody and obligate them or pressure them or bully them or whatever into a certain mode or methodology? And what it came down to, as we were discussing last week, is that you work on yourself, as Mush Talk is saying, and that has a ripple effect on the environment around you and on the people around you. And so if we find ourselves falling into the trap of thinking in some weird way, that I need to control the situation by controlling myself, then we're still getting stuck in the same traps. We're still giving ourselves the same ego runaround. And that's where we can, again, that's a little bit of spiritual bypassing to bring that subject in again, where we're like, if I micromanage myself, I can micromanage other people, or vice versa. This is about something bigger and deeper than that. And I think it is hard for us to grasp that kind of relinquishing of that micromanaging, controlling tendency. And we might not label that freedom because it feels like a loss of control. And we talked about how scary that is in the beginning of this conversation.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly that. And it's the I feel it here, right? In the neighborhood that I'm in, North Jersey, 15, 20 minutes from New York City. There's this it's like something in the air that's so um tangible that people want to express. but it's not there even the space for expression that not necessarily might be freedom in itself, but that it may reflect a tiny bit of the vision of what freedom is. There's so much fear around it. You have cancel culture. You have politically correct language. Oh no, we get it. You can't talk like that. Some people. And you have triggering language that's specifically to make sure to trigger somebody. That's just somebody being an asshole just for being an asshole. And it's like you're getting that left, right, you're getting like you're just getting hit with it from both
From all
sides,
sides, yeah,
you know?
yeah,
I did when I said left, right, I did not mean politically. I meant like like you're just getting like slapped.
yeah.
Um, but I feel it. I feel it in the space. Um, and it's somehow a reflection of an internal conflict that's happening, and it's being reflected within the community and within society, you know? So having something like this where one can say, okay, here, this is what the um, unthinkable thought, and being able to express that, like that's powerful. That's powerful.
Thanks, Osama.
I think that we have come to the end of this talk.
All right. Do we have who have we not heard from anyone? Well, Khalil had to go. Chris, do you have anything on your mind?
No, I'm complete.
Cool. Rat, how about
Good.
you? How are you doing? I know you'll be in the chat. All
Yeah.
right, cool. Okay.
So I'm going to switch us over to Brady Bunch.
All right.
And here we are.
Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing to the conversation. It's good to see your faces and have you with us here in spirit, even if we don't get to see your face. And for those of you watching on the replay, feel free to join in on the conversation and take note that this is just another facet of this ongoing conversation that we've been having. And if you're having questions about what is mine to explore and to embrace, you can touch back on the conversations we've been having over the last few weeks. I'm pretty sure we did a video specifically on freedom in the past, so I say do a search for that on our channel. And I mentioned the conversations about fate, quote unquote,
Destiny.
versus destiny that we've had
Yeah.
in the past. And that can give you some ideas about how you can embrace your capacity to think, feel, live a bit more, quote unquote, freely and see where that leads you. And we look forward to hearing more about that as you guys continue your explorations into digging into those things that you are afraid to let yourself even consider for any number of reasons. The thought itself, I mean, if it's some dark stuff, this is not the same as doing the thing. It's just a matter of being aware, knowing thyself, all of that stuff. You get to be an adult. You get to make choices about your actions and to determine the values that you want to build your life upon. And that is within your capacity. I know everyone here and everyone watching these videos that is within your capacity, or you wouldn't be here. All right, so here we are in Brady Bunch mode. We can wave to each other, everybody watching on the replay, and we will see you next week.
Take care, folks.